think we can start with a prayer, and then we'll go around the table, introduce ourselves, and then we can start with some questions. Anyone, I think, at any time is free to ask any question. I'm going to kind of have both of our Buddhist chaplains kind of introduce their traditions, their chaplaincy journey, right? Some of the basic sort of questions, and you can speak at length to them. I know some have been like this or all over the map, but like a lot of us, but kind of how you got to where you are today. Maybe some of your, I know you have a lot of side things you're into. Please feel free to talk about those, so we can talk about a lot of those varied things and how they maybe connect with your faith and your practices. So we will do that, but we'll start off with a prayer now that we're all.
Is this being recorded now?
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Okay, so you can get to see us munch.
So our prayer goes as such. The rays of the sun, moon, and stars which nurture our spirits, and the five grains that nourish our body are all gifts from the eternal Buddha. Even a grain of rice or a drop of water is the result of meritorious work and hard labor. May this meal nourish our body, mind, and spirit to uphold the teachings of the Buddha, repay the four favors, and perform the pure conduct of serving others. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Itadakimasu.
Thank you.
Now, in the monastery, we would eat for 5 minutes as fast as we could, and then we'd leave. So it's nice that we get to sit.
So, I'll start, and feel free to eat. I'll start with a little introduction on the table. We can kind of go around and say who we are. First, I want to welcome everyone to our yearly, sort of annual spring tradition of doing a dinner dialogue, Spiritual Leader's Journey. We've had a couple different iterations of this. Last year we did our Jewish and our Muslim chaplain. Mark was on that. And the year before we did our pagan and our Hindu chaplain and talked about the relationship there. So I'm happy to announce our Buddhist chaplains who are here, and Reverend Ruman and Reverend Shudo, and of their respective Buddhist paths and traditions. And I want to say that I am the university chaplain. I am here, it's been a little over 3 years I've been in this role, and coming from a Catholic chaplain campus ministry background before this at the University of Rochester. It's been a blessing and a journey to meet so many fantastic colleagues in the field who advance interfaith work, advance just dignified work, and helping our students succeed and engage with the world and everything that surrounds us. And I just want to welcome everyone to this event, and thank you for coming. So we can go this way. Yeah. Mark.
My name is Mark Goldman. I'm the coordinator of Jewish Student Life and the advisor to RIT's Hillel on the campus. I've actually been on campus 14 years now, but I spent a good deal of time in residence life working with students living on campus, and I've been doing this about 2.5 years now, and really enjoy the environment. And so I'm glad that you all could be here.
My name is Ruman Groman, Reverend Ruman Groman. I'm the chaplain for the Nichiren Buddhist Community Group, and we've been here now 3 semesters, so we're very new. I was going to be ordained during COVID, and COVID interrupted that. So instead of in 2020, I came out in 2024, and then came to Andy to see if I could check the chaplaincy here. I had expressed interest or started at a hospice chaplaincy with a ride-along and sort of trying to get in with that group. And at the time I was just, because they held my parents, and it didn't quite work out. So as soon as I was just ordained in 2024. And before that I was training 10 years as a shaman, a novice priest. And then 10 years before that as a lay leader in the group. So that's where I am.
My name is Brian Schrader. My Dharma name is Kigaku Shudo, so I often just go by Shudo. Zen Soto Zen Buddhist priest, and I'm also a professor of philosophy. I've been at RIT for 24 years. This is my 40th year of teaching now. And I've been leading meditation here at RIT since 2002, and in 2010 I was ordained, and that's when I came on board as one of the chaplains. So kind of a second turnaround, but I don't know if this is the point really to go into any biography.
Sure.
So I'm just introducing myself at this point.
You're good. Take your time.
My name is Elena Fedorovska. I'm a research professor in College of Science, and I'm a member of Shudo's CESE group.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming.
My name is Logan Burns. I'm a fourth year accounting student with a minor in philosophy, and I'm also taking the Zen Thought and Practice class under Brian Schroeder, and yeah, just trying to be involved in the Zen community. So.
Hi, I'm Ethan. I am the current president of RIT Hillel, and I'm very involved with religious life in general. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. He's also the vice president of our Interfaith
Oh, yeah,
Council.
definitely.
He's also a student employee of SRL. He's being bashful. So, but thank you everyone for coming. If more folks come in, we can just invite them to go. We can grab a plate and sit down. So I guess if anyone has questions at any time, if they're curious about, as I am, about your two lives, please feel free to jump in. I just want to also mention that we had a few sick students today who were gracious enough not to come and get us sick, but that's why we're a little late on the folks who signed up originally. So, but for either one of you can go first. I think maybe tell us a little bit about your background, your journeys, how you've not fallen in, how you sort of carved into a vocation, into your Buddhist chaplaincy and what that looks like. I know you kind of mentioned just now, some of you, how it took a long time to form that relationship. So maybe a little bit about the background and maybe dig into more of the biographical, who you are and who you are now, who you were then. Yeah. So, either one.
Yeah, okay. I went to RIT and graduated in 1994. And when I was here, I took philosophy was my minor, and I concentrated on philosophy of religion. And then I graduated. And then 4 years later, I was in Hawaii and went to a temple. It was inspired. I don't know what denomination it was Buddhist. I came back and found a group in my community. And like most things, if you show up, you grow and you start to take on responsibilities. And I just kept showing up. And the teacher I had at the time moved. And so the way that he taught is he had me teaching right away. So I started teaching Dharma around Buffalo, where I'm from, in 2002, in 2004. And he left a couple years later, and then I took over the Sangha as lay leader and just taught around Buffalo. Setting up and breaking down our temple wherever we could find a space. And sometimes for stretches and sometimes not. Sometimes late, it's actually very easy because then in 2014, I asked to become a priest, to be trained as a priest. And so it took 10 years to receive that, and then of course COVID, like I had mentioned, got in the way and interrupted that. And it was actually a very difficult journey to stick with it because of other issues within my group, and I did, and it was everything I hoped it would be. And so it was natural for me to, because the chaplaincy was really important to me. So I was very happy to come to RIT and mix that with Nichiren Shu Buddhism. Having that here, doing things like this, and other ways to be Buddhist. And I have a lot to say about like the teaching time and everything, but like that's the general structure. And it's pretty simple. Like don't quit. It's just like a job. We have all these students here. I teach in the College of Art and Design, and I teach a business practices class. And one of the things I tell them is just don't quit. Don't stop doing it. and you will become it. And because it's very challenging, it's a challenging field. And Buddhism's no different. It's got its challenges, and people who are interested, I feel, don't go, don't stray. You know, I didn't really leave. They just naturally flow into leadership roles, and that's. I think your faith. I think for me, my faith grew in a way that I felt that teaching was an integral part of my life.
Yeah.
Very, very broad stroke.
Well, the Buddhist path found me in 1972. And it was actually through the medium of television, of all things. It was an old, I called it Eastern Western at the time. 1972 was a series, and I managed to just watch the series pilot called Kung Fu. And it's a story of a half Chinese, half American who becomes ordained as a Shaolin priest in the 19th century, China. And then he comes to the United States and he's pursued by the Chinese government. So there's a series that went for 3 years. And while there was some martial arts dimension to it, that was really downplayed in favor of a real philosophical, spiritual approach. And there was something about it that really grabbed me. And at the time, I was just finishing up my 3-year confirmation training in the Lutheran Church. And I already knew, in a sense, at that age, that I would probably go into the ministry. But there was something about being a Shaolin priest that really always stuck with me. And it inspired me to start martial arts training, and that kept my foot in the Eastern tradition. And then along the way, one of the martial arts senseis was also a Chan practitioner. That's Chinese Zen. So I started doing some meditation, and then I went to college as a philosophy major and studied Asian philosophy there. I wound up going to the seminary. I became involved at that time in the Buddhist Christian dialogue and was ordained. But soon after my ordination, I realized that a life as a Lutheran pastor wasn't for me. So I went back to academia and I studied philosophy and did my PhD in the area of philosophy of religion. But I continued to develop my interest in East Asian philosophy and Japanese philosophy in particular. And then in my late 20s, I found my first teacher and began a formal Zen practice. Kept that up until I met my current teacher along the way. And after we got to know each other, he invited me to consider ordination. So I took a half a year of meditation on that and decided to do it. But he said, if you do this with me, you have to do your training in Japan and your ordination in Japan. And that was a major, major step for me to take, of course. But not being Japanese and not living in Japan and having responsibilities at the university, I couldn't just take off. It's a minimum of 3 years in the monastery. So I've cobbled together my time by going to Japan when I was like on a sabbatical or research leaves of absence or extended stays. And then eventually I fulfilled the minimum time as a monastic and then continued to train with him. And then in 2010, I was ordained. And that's when I as I mentioned earlier, I became one of the official chaplains here at the university, though I had been working with Jeff Heron, leading meditations since I arrived here in 2001, 2002. So that's a little bit of my background. I feel, in a sense, I've always been a priest. And I still move in many ways within two very different religious worlds. And it's difficult to identify myself. I can't really just say I'm a Christian anymore. At least my Christianity is not like most people's Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And my Buddhism, my Zen, conversely, is not like the average. And as a scholar, this is the last thing I'll say right now, but this is fundamental to my understanding of the Dharma. I've been very interested in the early formation of Zen in China, and that largely had to do with what is underplayed in Japan, underplayed in the United States and Europe, and that's the Taoist foundation of Zen. The Buddhist influence is what was transmitted over time. But once Buddhism moved out of China, moved into Japan, it was more affected by Shinto and to a lesser degree Confucianism. But Confucianism affected all of East Asia. But the Taoist dimension is fundamentally Chinese. And there's no real analogous indigenous tradition. And it's just sort of been lost or de-emphasized over time, and in part because there isn't a lot of extant writing from the Tang Dynasty to really dig into that. So this has been my project the last 20 years of developing what I call Dao Zen. I want to keep the Chinese name Dao and the Japanese Zen, and bring those together. And the way this teaching manifests itself has to do with the emphasis on Zen is the meditation school of Buddhism. So there are, the sutras, and those are revered, but the fundamental teaching about Zen is not to rely on words and concepts. So meditation is the key to attaining the awakened Buddha mind. But in Taoism, it's the cultivation of qi energy. And so combining that more bodily, physical dimension with the more mental aspects of Buddhism is what I'm trying to recover. I think that was there in the beginning of Chinese Zen, and in some sense it's been a little too de-emphasized. And one of my criticisms about contemporary Zen Buddhism is it tends to be a little more ascetic than it needs to be. A little bit more to the materiality and physicality of life that should be recovered. But that's largely because Zen developed in a monastic setting, and of course, there's a place for asceticism in the monastery. Yeah. So that's what I do both as a scholar and as a priest, and try to harmonize those dimensions.
Anyone else have any questions?
Something that's detailed, you referenced 4 gifts, or in the prayer before the meeting?
The 4 favors.
4 favors?
The 4 favors.
Can you share what those 4 favors are?
Yeah, and that's what I meant by, a lot of times in the prayers, there are contents there that need elaboration. So these are favors of parents, of society, so parents, society, sentient beings, and also the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So it's about receiving acknowledging what's been contributed to you, and then repaying those 4 favors. and not through like, this costs money, but through our actions and our venerations. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the comprehensive, the teacher, the teachings of the group. So they offer a lot. This is a big offering for us, for us, and I hope people get something out of it, but for us as well. We're in this opportunity. So the pure conduct of serving others is part of that repaying. I think that's closely relating, is to serve. So the priest's role is serve, to serve. Thanks. Thanks for asking.
One question I had was, since you guys both mentioned you were professors, have you had any time where like your teaching as a professor has influenced your faith? Like,
Well, has my teaching influenced my faith? Last year, I was saying to myself often, I feel more like a drama teacher than an illustration teacher. Like those skills come into, I think it's the other way, where my faith has influenced my career. So I'm an illustrator, I teach illustration, and I'm a freelance illustrator. And so when I identified my academic research, it was on iconography. So specifically drawing iconography. And so that makes its way into the classroom, more so than the class into that. I think that the fluidity of teaching helps in front of groups, which I was sort of pretty fine with that, as a Dharma teacher.
And for me, certainly, but Zen is more philosophical and psychological than it is religious. And because I am a philosopher, I'm constantly questioning, constantly thinking through different positions, and that journey had a profound impact on my faith when half a life ago when I was in the church, and still continues to affect me today. Interestingly enough, just it's in the past decade, I've gone back and started to think and write theologically again. And but I'm coming from a very different standpoint. That was in part impacted by Buddhism. So my theology is much more mystical than it was in the past. Mystical theology isn't part of the Lutheran tradition. But as I start thinking about notions of Godhead and how those resonate with the experience that sometimes arises in Zen, and my scholarship as a philosopher, I was hired to teach philosophy of religion and to teach Buddhist philosophy. So the professor that Yuman-san had at RIT, right? That was Jamie Campbell, right?
I'm not sure, but
Oh, probably.
probably.
Yeah. Did you take a Buddhism class
Yes,
or something?
yes.
So he's the one. So interestingly enough, I was hired to replace Jamie when he retired. And that, has continually shaped my development. So I regularly teach courses such as Logan is in this semester. I'm teaching a class on Zen thought and practice. East Asian philosophy is a regular part of our course offerings. I offer special topics classes, but I've also taught classes in postmodern philosophical theology and philosophy of religion. So all of that stuff constantly is affecting me, because one of the things I try to do is never teach the course, any of those courses, in the same way. And this keeps me alive. So what new text I've encountered since I did it last time are either brought into that class directly or at least certainly indirectly in terms of my own creation. one of the big questions that I'm always asking myself, it's almost become my personal calling. What does it mean to be a Zen priest? I always felt like I knew what it meant to be a Lutheran pastor. No question about that. There's dogma, there's expectations, but a Zen priest, you say, well, what's that? And it's more than just being defined by officiating at services and rituals or teaching people how to meditate. It's a constant journey of becoming aware of the call to be a bodhisattva, to help others. So it's really that altruistic dimension that gathers together my identity as a priest and as a philosopher. And when people ask me more, what do I do? I always, first of all, say I'm a priest. Oh, and I also teach philosophy. I don't want to identify myself as a professor anymore. I'm just not in that place.
Conversely to that, what parts of academia do you think most negatively affect your faith in terms of having to follow kind of like the rigor of academia, but then also, like devoting your life to a philosophy or religion that is like, it's not supposed to be attached to this rigor, if that makes sense?
Well, there's no conflict there. So I think, I like what you said, attachment to the rigor. The rigor just is rigor.
Right.
So it's equally not being attached to the attachment to the rigor. So the Lotus Sutra is our text, and so the Buddha taught all these sutras, and the sutra is a discourse. And we hold the Lotus Sutra in our faith. And the Lotus Sutra teaches that the Buddha taught through expedience, similes, parables, stories of previous lives, and expedience, mostly. So whether it's in the classroom, I teach meditation in Lockport is where I live, so I commute to RIT. It's a distance, it's more towards Niagara Falls than it is here. I teach meditation there, or lead meditation is there. I have RIT. I am a freelance illustrator, and I'm a tattooer on the weekends. So there's a lot of different components. I have a shrine in my station at the tattoo shop. And if I bring my authentic self to each four of these components, I do illustrations for Buddhist magazines as well as athletics and whatever. If I'm true to my authentic self, then I bring the Dharma to all of those things. And just as the Lotus Sutra teaches through expedience, if I'm natural, then my tattoo friends will hear the Dharma. If I'm natural, then my students will hear the Dharma. If I'm natural to myself and the Dharma, then my meditation group will hear it. And my Sangha, my Nichiren Buddhist community Sangha, that we meet every week, and I teach, we have service, so we're very ritualistic. We have service, and then we have Dharma talks. And if I'm naturally in the Dharma and of myself, then those words come out in a way that they can hear. So I live my life through the idea of the Lotus Sutra that says all of these things that work for each person is right for their ears, the right teachings for the right person at the right time in the right place, whether that's meditation, or that's service, or that's hymns, or that's tattooing a Buddha panther on someone's shoulder, which I've done, and that's right in my iconography. So if anything, that gets a little dicey. But I draw a lot of iconography for tattoos. And some people will say no, mostly Westerners say yes. Easterners don't like tattoos as much, like that way, like we like them here.
Kind of shuts you out of a lot of the onsen, huh?
Yes, private onsen.
Yeah.
When I did, I went to the monastery in Japan in early September. It was quite hot. And I wore this. This is from there. This is one of the long sleeves I wore during the monastery. and I can show my tattoos, and I didn't pass out. I can't believe it, but I didn't. My hands were wet, like I put them in a bucket of water. So you can't show them at all, and so I don't have tattoos in my hands or my neck or anywhere that's really visible that I can't cover up with Under Armour.
Onsen's a natural hot spring spa. Japanese frequent a lot, but very, as you pointed out, very different views about body decoration. Piercing is also included there, tattoo, especially. So your question was what negatively impacts?
Yeah. Kind of being in the environment of academia.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I feel like I've been super fortunate, being able to combine my life as a professor that teaches this stuff as well as a priest that is enables me to share the practice. Like anything, it's the everyday politics and humdrum that can wear you down, but that's life, and Buddhism is not about running away from life. And Zen is all about confronting who you are in the here and now, in the immediate moment. Famous German mystic named Meister Eckhart liked to write about the eternal now. Now you have these contemporary Japanese Zen philosophers that turn to people like Eckhart, and they're like, yeah, there's something that was happening in that 14th century Rhineland mysticism that we can really resonate with, and that's been, quite empowering, for both traditions in terms of helping build a cross-cultural dialogue, but then in realizing that the essence of spirituality, what I would like to think of as authentic spirituality, transcends religious distinction. So, spirituality is a tricky term, and for the most part of my life, I've always thought of myself as religious. But I understand why a lot of people want to run away from the term religion because they associate it with a certain set belief or institution. And yeah, in that sense, it is. Spirituality now has become a broader, more accepted term. I'm a little wary of that term too because spirituality also may have these Gnostic overtones or seems to allude to a kind of a metaphysical beyond, and that's not really sad. But so we always move within the parameters of an inadequate language, and I think early Zen recognized this, which is why a core teaching of all the great teachers, since Bodhidharma, is don't rely on words and concepts. Don't think that we can nail reality down with thought and language, because that's only drawing lines that ultimately separate us more than they bring us together at times.
I have a question. You mentioned that what your kind of direction is leading you toward this Taoism. I'm interested to know if you have contemplated or see the possibility of developing practices that are unique to that particular integration.
Well, I have. Certainly in my own personal life, and I would like to start teaching some of those techniques in a more direct way. There's just never enough time or, I think, interest among people like yourself, who've been sitting with me for a number of years now, to really enter into that. I mean, when we meet for service on a weekly basis here, we go through the traditional Soto service, and it's just hard enough for people to sit still for 20 minutes, right? So, we got working on that, working on counting the breath or following the breath, and to do any significant work, guided meditation about chi cultivation, different breathing techniques. Before the pandemic, I started doing that. And after we would meet, and back then, when we were able to advertise, right? You hear that? And all of our communities had much greater numbers as a result. I mean, I'm talking about being able to send out email announcements on a regular basis, and since we can't do that anymore, flyers get ripped down after about a week. The communities are much smaller, but it used to be 2-3 times a week I would do the service, and then afterward I started teaching people a form of qigong, and use that as the entry to start developing chi cultivation. And those that were staying with that, it was like, okay, once they got these sort of breathing techniques down and understood some of the teaching behind that, how do you incorporate this into your sitting meditation in such a way that it's going to vitalize it rather than be a distraction? So, but that's where I want to go with this.
Yeah, maybe at some point.
Yeah, and I'm ready to start as I'm nearing the end of my time here, and once I relocate, out west, take out my role as a full-time priest at Aishoji. This is what I plan to do.
I would like also to ask you, what are the points of connection between Zen and your?
I'm not familiar enough with Zen to talk about, to really identify any points of connection. My personal practice, our meditation is chanting meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's resuscitation of faith language, Shindoku, which is a Japanese pronunciation of Chinese characters. To the large extent, that is our primary meditation. There's also our primary mantra, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, which I said during the prayer. Chanting that is also a meditation, and that is called Shadaigyo. So we would say that for a period of time. And some people chant for hours.
Mm-hmm.
For me, my personal practice, because I lead Vipassana meditation, the Satipatthana Sutra. That is not within Nichiren Shu necessarily. I because of the expedient acknowledgement, I really feel like that's a key part of my personal path and growing, and also relating how the other parts fit into it. But I really love this dinner because I really haven't had the opportunity to talk with Shoto-san very often, and so I get to hear, just like you, some of that perspective. So not really. There's so much within our traditions, and where Shoto-san teaches philosophy of religion, there's almost an impetus to learn more, points of the Dharma. I would do that on my own. So lately I've been curious about Christian mysticism. So, and I do like other forms of Buddhism, but there's so much in the Lotus Sutra and maybe Tiantai Buddhism, which Nichiren Shoten, our founder, was a Tiantai Buddhist before he hit the school and identified the Lotus Sutra as the text to follow.
So is Dogen, by the way. And so here's a point of commonality, because Dogen revered the Lotus Sutra. He thought that of all the texts, this was a fundamental text. But there is also, I think, in Zen, paradoxically, and more of an openness to a number of different sutras, while at the same time saying, don't rely on them. So no one particular sutra stands out. One of the big founders of Zen was this monk, Huineng. He had absolutely no education. He had no training as a monk. He changed the whole course and history of Chinese Zen because he was given the Dharma. But when he heard, as a teenager, a monk reciting the Diamond Sutra, something went off. And he went into the monastery, and the abbot there recognized there was something special about him, but he had no training in money. He couldn't read, he couldn't write. He was, a kid from the fields. And so they sent him to work in the kitchen. And over time, it came out that, here's someone who really understood the doctrine of emptiness. And so secretly, in the middle of the night, to avoid, the literal wrath of jealous monks, at midnight, he was given the signs of the Dharma transmission, the robe, the bowl, the insight into Diamond Sutra. And then he was told, go hide yourself for the next decade or 15 years out in the woods. Because there were people that were just thinking either the master had gone mad or else this young person had somehow coerced the master and taken the bowl and the robe. But that completely changed everything in Zen, because what it meant was no matter how learned, how practiced, how developed you were as a monk, that's no guarantee. Enlightenment isn't just a question of attaining it by following step after step after step, which means anybody. And this is another place where Nichiren Shu and Soto, Zen in general, come together. All things are Buddha nature.
And when you said that, so a bunch of things jumped out for me. So the Lotus Sutra is divided into parts, but you could kind of say the second part is how to practice. So the sutra itself contains teachings, but it basically says all teachings are these teachings. So like the idea of not relying on words or anything like that. The sutra is kind of like instructions for all the other sutras and to apply them in there. And there's many Buddhas, so Shakyamuni Buddha, and at the time of Nichiren's life, you had a lot of Pure Land Buddhists, Amida Buddha. So you had to die, reborn into Pure Land, where you could, so pray to Amida Buddha, where you could then become enlightened. And the Lotus Sutra says you can do that now in this life. So, and it goes all the way from the child who draws a stupa with his fingernail in the sand has attained enlightenment. So it's awakening our already existing Buddha nature, and just that realization. We have a similar never despising bodhisattva who didn't study any sutras and didn't do anything except pay respect to people. I respect you always because you will become a Buddha one day. And he was hated for it. And people would throw sticks at him and he'd run away. And louder, from a distance, I respect you. And they'd throw things, an arrow, and he'd go even farther and scream, I respect you always. So it's about how we act in our intentions and our compassion, rather than saying, okay, I memorized the entire sutra. And we might memorize it for chanting, and we do. We memorize it quite a bit. And then we know what we're saying because we also read it. But that isn't action, necessarily. The action for our roles as priests to say, I'll chant this while you chant it. I'll be the actor for this, and lay a fertile ground for your enlightenment. And that's bodhisattva nature.
May I ask another question? So you mentioned the expediency. Can you explain it? What does it mean?
This could be a metaphor. This could be, and there's a lot of metaphors. This could be a parable. It could be a story, a simile. It could be, it's another kind of explanation of the umbrella. My expedient might be meditation. My expedient might be to act like never despising bodhisattva. My expedient might be chanting. Some people see just chanting Odaimoku, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo is your key practice. An expedient is the right teaching for the right time at the right place. And so that may come in any form to help a person understand, our language. Something that I really love about meditation is the idea that the language of the body is sensation. It's not English or Portuguese or Russian. It's sensation. It's feeling. And I forget. I'm so sorry. I
What
lost
is
my
about
thought.
expedient, that is right teaching at the right time.
Right. So I guess it's how we feel. It's how we act more than. For us, doctrine's really important. So the Buddha as a list maker, as priests we memorize the lists, but also as practitioners, from our point of view, I memorize the lists because I use them. So the reason I became a priest, the real underlying reason I stay as a priest and why I fought to my ordination is because Buddhism worked for me. If it didn't work, like any other thing in my life, I'd quit and do something else. And I tell my students, if there's a day where I don't think you can get a job, I will leave here because I'm not just going to teach and take your money. And this isn't my job because I don't have a job. This is my job because I like it. I also do art. If Buddhism stops working, I'll quit. But it can only work if I practice it. So the lists work for me because I can say, today I'm going to work on this thing. See how it goes. Let's run this for a week. Let's run something else for a week, and just keep trying different ways. There's a key. There's a toggle in everyone, or a lock, and each expedient is the key to unlock the tumblers of your enlightenment. Somewhere is my key. I just haven't found it. It's there. I've heard it 100 times, but not in the combination of words that resonate enough for me to say, okay, my suffering is, I will no longer backslide into my suffering. I get it. I know I've heard it, but not the right way.
I guess my question would be, you both talked about some figures in your respective denominations of Buddhism. What are some of those central figures, for folks who are maybe listening that don't understand much about them or know much about the history? I think you mentioned Dogen, and you mentioned Nietzsche. And how does that influence you? You know what I mean? Are you still practice their words every day? Do they influence the way? I know they influence the way you teach. You know what I mean? And you kind of have multiple sort of identities that you hold, right, in your lives. We all do, but so maybe a little bit about the key or central figures in your yeah.
There's this guy called Buddha.
Well, of course.
Do you want to go ahead first?
Yeah. So teacher-wise, I mentioned Tiantai, and so there's a lot of the teachings that I practice, and they came over with Nichiren Shonin, and his disciples were, and some of the temples were also Tendai temples, and they switch hands, over the centuries. But so Nichiren Shonin, the 13th century Buddhist reformer, who was very concerned with the people. So, like Shiro-san said, the Buddha. This is where the teachings began. And when the Buddha was teaching, I'll try to be brief, it was a time where there was a caste system, and there was corruption, and there was wealth. And the Buddha fought against that and said, no, all people can come into my teachings. So you had, and then with Nichiren Shonin, you had the similar situation where there was control and wealth, and the government And Nichiren Shonin said, no, this Namo Myoho Gekyo is a jewel wrapped around the necks of the ignorant. Just chant. You don't have to know the sutra. You don't have to be able to read. And like the people preaching on the street corners. So you have Nichiren Shonin, you have Tendai, you have Shakyamuni. For us, we really venerate by example the Buddha's 10 primary disciples, different figures within the Lotus Sutra, Fugen Bodhisattva, praxis of meditation and study, ends the sutra. The beginning is Manjusri for wisdom. So different characters within the Lotus Sutra, which is my draw to iconography. I find inspiration. I love never despising Bodhisattva. I don't see myself as a particularly intelligent person, and I can look at never despising, and I know I don't have to be, and that I don't have to judge others who are not, because they don't have to be either. And so there's, depending, the Buddha's son Rahula, his primary virtue is to be inconspicuous. Just if you're in an uncomfortable room and you see a statue of a Buddha and you just nod your head a little bit, that's good enough. And, so sometimes it's clairvoyant, sometimes it's the want to be supernatural. So depending on where you are in your day, in your practice, you might draw on one of the, I would look at Tesvaras, different people within the sutra, who's got like Ken Bodhisattva, or Kuan Yin, all the same people. And that's what I love about iconography. A lot of them are placeholders for a spirit of nature. Some of are just, manifestations of another being. In Mary and Kijimojin, like there's so many across religions too.
Many of those figures that Yuma-san just mentioned are also present in the Zen tradition too. Bodhisattvas like Manjushri or Guan Yin, Chinese name for Avalokiteshvara, Samantabhadra, embracing aspects of wisdom or compassion or action. And a bodhisattva is someone who has attained the level of realization to become a Buddha, but has vowed to remain, at least as the Zen perspective, remain within the world to help bring others to awakening. Many of the Buddha's early disciples, including some of these bodhisattvas, they were known as arhats. They're ones who attained realization through their own effort. But later on, it began as Mahayana developed, and Nichiren Buddhism and Zen, Tendai. These are all coming out of the Mahayana emphasis on the bodhisattva, the helping others as a more selfless, egoless way to proceed. I mentioned Dogen. Dogen is a great philosopher, poet, thinker. He's not revered as a bodhisattva. There were, in Zen, we put a lot of emphasis, at least historically, on lineage. So I am the 96th ancestor in my lineage, tracing it all the way back to the Buddha. Okay, but the whole lineage question, some people think it's important. For me, it's more of an expedient. It helps keep you connected to the idea that this Dharma that you are teaching is hopefully in line with what has been taught throughout the centuries. There's just a lot more emphasis on it in Zen, particularly in forms of Zen called Minzai, in which one's awakening, one's enlightenment needs to be recognized and then verified by someone who has themselves been recognized as having attained that insight. not just like, yeah, I think I got it, you know, self-proclaimed, you know, enlightened master. I think it's a little too overly emphasized, but the sense of continuity. So all of these figures have offered something, and many of them have writings attributed to them that we go back and take a look at, or at least their stories have been passed along by others. What Zen generally doesn't do is venerate. Okay, if any figure is worthy of veneration, it's the Buddha. But the Buddha was just a person like us. And the Jataka tale symbolically said, yeah, he lived 10,000 lifetimes before he attained his great awakening. And not all those lifetimes were good lives. You don't have, you know, I mean, live life with a thief, live life with a liar, a murderer, a bandit, you know, whatever. And also a life as a great human being. But it's this sense that our awakening, our realization of what it means to be a human being is an ongoing process, not only in thinking in terms of time involving past and future lives, but from one moment to the next. So the big question in Zen is, who am I? What am I? And each and every moment as our karma changes, we change in our realization. I like to tell people, I don't think there are any enlightened beings. There are enlightened actions, there are enlightened thoughts, there are enlightened teachers. But human beings are human beings, and sometimes even the most awakened can misstep. But we're not judged by that. Each and every moment provides a new space to begin again. For me, this has always resonated very strongly with a lot of the my understanding of Jesus in the Gospels. I think he was a teacher of karma too. But I won't go into those parables. That's for another time.
Anyone have any questions? We have about 10 minutes left. I've got one more, but I will hold if anyone else has any questions. So I'm curious, structure-wise, in your denominations, what does that look like? I know you mentioned monastery. You mentioned going back to the northwest, going to the northwest, and so what does that look like? You're out in the world, so to speak. How does that, in terms of attachment, detachment, are you still connected? What does that look like?
So like the home base.
Right, yeah, you know, what does that look like in your perspective?
So in Yamanashi Prefecture in south central Japan, west of Tokyo, is Mount Minobu. And that is considered to be the Mount Sacred Eagle where the Buddha taught the Lotus Sutra in India, or on the foot, is in Japan is supposed to be like, that's representation. So our central location is at Mount Minobu in Manabu-san. And so all the temples around Japan and then outside of Japan all are conscious and linked to that temple. So you might have you might have one lineage that has 6, 7 temples, maybe more, and they might be in Japan only, or they might be around the world, which is more likely, a small sangha to a big temple. Here in the West, in Nichiren Shu Buddhism specifically, we don't really build Japanese-style temples. So your sangha might look like this, with an altar set up, and it might be very simple. There's so much Buddhism in the West. Nichiren Shu is one I can speak towards. We have organizations within, and there's not a lot of temples here. There's a lot of Nichiren Shu Buddhists, but there's not so many temples. And they're dotted all around the country, and there are Japanese temples, and then there are Western temples. And sometimes they're together, but not always. A lot of the Japanese temples are Japanese cultural centers, and they have Japanese priests. And the Western, we're not segregated, but we could be smoother together. And I think every single priest strives for that. And practitioners. But, I think any culture is as different as a Japanese culture and a Western culture are going to have some natural, frankly, walls. It's just the way it's going to be. Because Buddhism it's not our national, it hasn't taken hold here like in the East. America is very different, it's very individualized, very different.
In terms of rank, or how does that work in your? Yeah.
Shudo-san was asking me. There are a lot of ranks, right to bishop at Manuba-san. Here in the West, my teacher is the Bishop of North America, but it's not quite the same, because our temple structure is a little different. And there's 10 or 15. I'm the lowest rank, where I was also expressing I'm fine staying there. There's other training I want to do, but because of my position here at RIT, I'm not able to participate in the training because they're in September, which as program director, as you know, I am busy in September. I can't go to Japan. So, but as a facilitator of the Dharma, I don't need to go higher in rank. There are things I can't do, but those trainings aren't necessarily in that system. Those are subsets.
It's similar in Zen. There are three main branches of Zen, really two. One of them, the smallest, is kind of lumped together these days with Rinzai Zen and then Soto Zen, which I am. Both of them developed out of China, but over time, those are Japanese words, by the way, Rinzai and Soto. The Rinzai school emphasizes koan practice as a way of freeing the mind from attachment to rational intellection. And Soto has come over the years to really emphasize more of what the Chinese called silent illumination, so meditation. But there's also a place for koan practice. We call it koan contemplation. Shoshin-san, every Monday evening, we cover a case, a story or a question in this one collection of koans, and hopefully it opens us to see the Dharma a little bit more. But in Rinzai, you sit with that koan, and then you have to present your answer on a regular basis to the koan master, who will then see, did you really get it? And half the time the responses are not even in words. You have to answer the koan without words. That's tough. Yeah. I began my training that way. But anyway, so these two branches, I'll just speak to Soto. What we have are two main temples. Eishoji, Eiheiji. Eishoji is my home temple. Eiheiji, which was established by Dogen, and then a couple generations later, Sojiji, which was established by Keizan. And they were both, major forces in the spreading of Soto. Keizan's kind of like Paul was to Jesus. So Kazan was kind of that way to Dogen. Dogen, was really very strict, monastically oriented. Chances are Dogen Zen would have just died away. But Kazan could speak to the people, like Paul could evangelize and spread the teaching beyond the Jewish community that was largely focused on Jesus. So that's an analogy. So in the 19th century, during the Meiji era, when Japan was wrestling with European imperialism and began to open its doors to the West, the government sort of cracked down on Buddhism and the institutional hierarchy. And it said, okay, you guys, you're both head temples. Every 2 years, you're the head temple. Then it goes to you. So there are 2 head priests, only at one time. They're the only 2 in Zen that are called Zen teacher. And then we have a number of ranks in the priesthood also in Soto. I'm in Osho. So there's a few ranks of like training priest level. Then I've received what is called Dharma transmission. And that was where I was recognized by an authorized priest who is a Daiyosho. So that Dai means great or head. But it's someone who's just gone through extra training and is capable, authorized to ordain people or give Dharma transmission. I can't give Dharma transmission. I can give Jukai. So taking the precepts, the vows, Shoshin-san has done Jukai with me. And that's really the heart of even what it means to be a priest. The priest vows are just additions to the core Jukai precepts. And she was ready after auditing classes and East Asian philosophy that I've taught and sitting with me, and so it's not just like, oh, I want to become a member of your church. Can you give me Jukai? That's not the way it works. Or I want to be a priest. Can I be an ordained priest? Yeah. Kosho was like, yeah, we've been practicing Zen for 40 years. I think maybe now you might know something. He's like, but it's not because you're a professor. And keep that in mind. When I send you to the monastery, I was like one of the oldest of the priests there. I was also the lowest rank. And so, and he said, nobody cares that you teach Buddhist philosophy and that you can recite the sutras and they can't. That's not what matters. You've got to develop anew. So we have a saying in Zen, Zen mind, beginner's mind. Always going back to that original standpoint. But now in terms of hierarchy, there are, I think, 15,000 Soto temples in Japan, and there are 32 training monasteries. And so, I went to one of those training monasteries, and when I go back to Japan, it's just to deepen my practice. Maybe one day I might become a Daiyosho, which means I could be authorized to give Dharma training if I ever wanted to appoint a successor. But I have a feeling unless my teacher ordains or gives transmission to another person, and he told me for over 10 years, the Dharma dies with me. I'll never appoint a successor. And I never expected that, and I didn't care. Like, I'm completely happy to be just at that rank. And maybe he was like looking for, I don't know what he saw in me, but I don't think I'm either worthy or that I'll complete the training, if I do, to ever have a Dharma successor. So that lineage will end with me. But I'm listed now in Japan with Soto-shu, which is kind of like the Soto Vatican, as being in the lineage. And as I said before, the lineage is really important. There's a lot of Soto Zen centers and Soto temples in the United States and in Europe. Very few, though, that have been recognized by Japan, because Zen started coming over to the United States in the 1920s. And now it's been several generations. And as Zen has kind of molded itself and transformed to become more palatable to Americans, they've kind of stepped away from Japan. My teacher likes to say, when the Dharma came over the Pacific to America, its pure water became Coca-Cola. So there's still a lot of water in Coke, but it's not the same, right? And who knows? When I went over to Europe, it became good wine. Let's say. But it's always transforming. Right? So there's no real hierarchy of temples in the United States. What there is, though, is a body of teachers and Zen centers that get together on an annual basis and to talk about how they can help advance the spreading of the teaching.
Well,
So-
we are at time, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to thank you both so much. This was amazing, and I learned so much.
Thank you all for coming.
And I have a couple parting gifts for both of you, and anyone who came, because honestly, it's a small, tight group. So this is sponsored by our Interfaith Council, and I want to thank Mark for helping order the food, and Ethan for setting up some of the tech and everything
Thank
like
you.
that.
Thank
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I will make sure to send you the video so you can share with your groups if you would like to. But I hope you have a great rest of the week. Hopefully the weather gets a little warmer and we can welcome spring a little more. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for setting everything up.